So most people who scout the draft at any capacity probably know that projecting shooting is pretty difficult. I've been doing this for a little while now, and I still think I'm pretty bad at it. But as I've learned, I think one of the more underrated components of projecting shooting growth, especially like general off-dribble scoring growth, is like someone who's hitting a lot of long twos in college and different kind of mid-range shot making that I think eventually translates to more general shot making and pull-up three-point shot making. There are a lot of examples of this, actually. Pascal Siakam is one of the most obvious ones. I'm not going to go into much detail on any of these guys, but I highly recommend you check out my pal PD Webb's video on old Siakam with Jake Rosen. Very, very good content. But Siakam was like a super high volume inside the arc shot maker, and a lot of his stuff came on actions he doesn't really run in the NBA, where he's more like initiating offense with the Raptors because he's obviously an all NBA player now. But it was stuff like this where he'd pick and pop into a little face up pull up jumper, and this is the stuff he did like routinely. Again, we had another like horn set pick and pop where Siakam would pop into a jumper, and this time he hits a nice little step back. Like, these are impressive shot making flashes for a guy who's 6'8", 6'9", with pretty impressive tools, even though he was not shooting threes at all in college. And then there were pretty tough self-created shots where Pascal's able to use his size and his footwork to get into the middle of the defense, to get pretty deep and hit a little floater turnaround mid-range. And obviously this eventually turned into more off-dribble three-point shot making and more off-dribble scoring in general. Another pretty prominent example of this is Kawhi Leonard, who early in his career with the Spurs wasn't really a shooter, more of like a defensive play finisher, and obviously blossomed into one of the better shot makers in league history as he's grown. And again, didn't really shoot threes in college, but Kawhi was a super prolific mid-range inside the arc shot maker. A lot of the stuff was face-up oriented, so it's important to look at a player's NBA role versus their college role, and see what we can project in terms of differences. Like Kawhi as a shot maker, we're not necessarily projecting him to be like a face-up scorer, but we can take plays like this where Kawhi is in the face-up, in the mid-range, uses his great touch to convert tough shots like this, and then more traditional initiating shots. This is more of the stuff that Kawhi does in the NBA, where he's able to run a little secondary pick and roll and pull up into a mid-range jumper. And again, like Siakam, a very prolific inside the arc shot maker in college, just in a very different way than he did it in the NBA, which eventually predicted growth into an elite shot maker. Last example that I'm going to show you right now is Jason Tatum, who, from my reading, it seems like a lot of people maligned him for his shot making, for his shot selection, but undervalued his interior shot making. Tatum had the best profile in terms of shot making and free throws of all of the guys that we talked about today. So he was a great free throw shooter, unlike Siakam and Kawhi, which we'll get to more. And he made so many of his long twos. But again, a lot of them looked like mid-post face-ups like this, where he'd hit a nice step back. Again, these are the type of shots that would turn into threes at the next level. And again, as we saw with Kawhi and Siakam, he'd flash this high-level touch in the intermediate area where he hits these kind of wonky, awkward little jumper floaters that, again, isn't something Tatum has done a ton of in the league. Actually, it's been kind of an issue for a lot of his career scoring in the intermediate. But obviously this translated out to three, where Tatum took so many more threes in the NBA than he did in college. And I think a large part of projecting that, while volume is super important, and I tout the importance of shot volume for projecting general shooting, when you're looking at pull-up off-dribble creation, these little intermediate plays are awesome. And obviously, this is an oldish clip, but now Tatum does things like this on the regular, which he wasn't really doing in college. So I think a lot of the pull-up shot-making gods that we see in the NBA were similar like this. So I actually made this a couple years ago. This is a little spreadsheet of a bunch of the best pull-up shooters in the league. Again, a little outdated, but see, all of them had a pretty good volume of long twos. Looks like 30 is kind of a baseline, and most of them were great free throw shooters. The outliers, of course, exist. Levine, who I just actually covered, who was in a weird role. A couple of these other guys, even Siakam and Middleton and Leonard, the ones who were worse free throw shooters, tended to have way more long two makes and to generally be just more prolific shot makers in terms of mid-range production. But you can definitely see a trend in terms of free throws, in terms of making long twos, So how can we take that and apply it to the 2022 draft? So let's go back to Bartorvik, which I went to on the other video that I did on Levine, and I ran a kind of basic query that's greater than 50 far twos made, greater than 82% free throw, which are obviously numbers that I kind of just picked somewhat randomly. They are a bit arbitrary, but there's no real way around that. But I think these are pretty solid approximations for guys who can really, really hit the long twos and are pretty prolific shot creators in the intermediate, but also have, certainly above average free throw percentages. I think the two really big ones for this draft are Malachi Branham, Ohio State freshman, who is a really versatile and impressive shot maker. Again, lacking the really high-level three-point volume, was very efficient, but didn't take a lot. Only 6 threes per 100 is pretty average, but as you can see, was a prolific mid-range shot maker, very efficient at the rim, and was a great free throw shooter. And the other one that I think this is really, really applicable to is Max Christie, who is a little bigger, a little more wingy than guardy, than Christie, than Branham, excuse me. But again, a prolific two-point shot maker, was a guy who took a lot and made a good amount. Again, didn't take that many threes, like 6.77 threes per 100 is better, but it's still nothing crazy. A lot of the great shooters take way more than that. A couple sleepery guys who I like, Isaiah Mosley is a crazy scorer who I think could be a real NBA player despite his athletic limitations. I think Tristan Newton is an interesting scorer as well. And then Cole Swider is another fringy, like super tall shooting wing that I kind of like as well. So just to kind of look into those two important ones a little bit, in Branham and Christie. Branham is like a really, really versatile shot maker inside the arc, as we kind of explained. He is so good at using his size to hold guys off in pick and roll. We see the jail here is very, very impressive, waiting for this nail defender to kind of leave. Again, gets the ball back, gets a little advantage. Obviously, creating separation off the dribble was a bit of an issue for him, but because of his shot-making tool, he's able to just rise over defenders and hit easy pull-ups. It's hard to contest this for a guy who's 6'5", can really, jump like that. Again, Branham able to show this same kind of tough mid-range shot making. Like we saw these same plays that Kawhi and Siakam and Tatum made, these little wonky touch intermediate shots that Malachi does pretty regularly as well. Again, this is the kind of shot that you can just imagine being a couple feet further back in the NBA. Like this is a 17-footer that you can easily imagine Malachi improving and moving back to 3, which obviously makes him so much more valuable because of the incredible value of pull-up threes. And then Malachi was even doing this off movement, where again, you can see a shot like this moving back 4 feet and becoming ultimately crazy valuable because of the value of the movement 3. So Malachi is an awesome shot-making prospect and someone who's probably worth like a top 20 pick plus because of that and because he's just good otherwise. You see all the versatile shot-making. I think there's a pretty good chance he develops into a very good shooter. And then Max Christie, whose shot making is a little more basic. He is taller and longer and will be able to get shots off maybe a little bit easier. A lot of his shots are just one dribble pull-ups, either where he comes off a screen or catches on a closeout or has like a little face up here. And again, able to use his high release, a little wide dribble here to space out his defender and just pull up over them and knock it down. Again, there was a little bit of tougher shot making. Again, you see Christie spinning back and hitting this pretty tough spin fade, which is just a very, very cool shot. But most of Christie's shot making is simpler. But again, I think role-wise, I view him differently from Branham, where Branham is more of like a combo guard. I think Christie's more of a pure wing. And for pure wing, this kind of pull-up shot making is impressive. And again, could be a guy who I think if he ever gets more on-ball reps in the league, could be a latent shooting developer. So this is just a little bit of how I evaluate shooting. It is very, very difficult, not a science in the slightest. But I think looking at the long twos and looking at the guys who are really prolific long two scorers, combined with the guys who are pretty great free throw shooters, can also be, a pretty strong heuristic for finding NBA players. And obviously, it's important to consider guys who have NBA tools and are NBA players in other ways. But for just projecting shooting growth and shot making growth, this is one of the best things that I look for.